everybody. Welcome to On Deck with Dawson Dawson. And look at our two guests for today. We have Ron Brand, who is the partner at Kahana and Feld's employment litigation practice. Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. And our another guest, we got a 2-for-1 today, Brian Selvan. He's an attorney and mediator with Walraven Westerfeld LLP, an amazing one at that. And he has over 20 years of experience focusing on California labor law and employment law. So welcome, you guys.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, hi, Kathy. Doing well. Thank you.
Well, that's good. I know it took me a while to get you guys on this On Deck with Dawson Dawson. It's been a crazy time of year, right? 2021. What is it? June? What the heck? So thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the show. We really are excited about getting this information out. I've been doing this, it'll be 40 years in October in search and staffing, which is a long time. Wow. And I have never seen it this way before. That's why I'm so excited to have you guys on the deck right now. I wish we were actually on the deck in Newport or Laguna, but we'll take this for now, right?
One of these days soon, we'll all be able to be back in person doing this together. That's right.
Yes. Oh, I can't wait for that. And I'm going to invite you to my house because I just renovated. We'll see how it looks.
Oh, nice.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, you guys. So let's get on with the questions for our listeners. So on June 17th, Cal OSHA approved changes in its November 2020 emergency temporary standard related to COVID-19 in the workplace. This was a big thing with most of my clients. What are the new changes and when would they be come into effect? I think, Ron, you're going to help us with that one, right?
Yes, thank you. So it's been a roller coaster ride with Cal OSHA. And as you stated, in November of 2020, Cal OSHA issued an emergency temporary standard to deal with COVID-19 in the workplace. And since then, it's proposed various revisions to this emergency temporary standard. And finally, on June 17th, Cal OSHA approved some new changes to the standard. And hopefully, the Cal OSHA Standard Board will actually adopt them so that they'll go into effect. However, Governor Newsom on June 17th issued an executive order making these new revised standards effective immediately, June 17th. So we'll see what happens if for some reason the Cal OSHA Standards Board doesn't approve it itself, but I suspect that it will. And there are essentially 10 key revisions to the ETS, the Emergency Temporary Standard. One is, and I know that employers are going to be very happy about this, is that in alignment with CDC and the California Department of Health guidelines, employees who are fully vaccinated will no longer need to wear face coverings. However, employees who are not fully vaccinated should and must wear face coverings in the workplace. Another key revision is that employers have to provide respirators, these N95 or KN95 masks, to those who are unvaccinated, but only upon request. Okay, but they have to, so employers now have to purchase these KN or these N95 respirators for use by employees who are not vaccinated. There are other key revisions regarding documenting fully vaccinated employees, either through a doctor's note or a vaccine card, or they can do what's called self-attestation, where they can just tell the employer in writing, I've been fully vaccinated.
Oh.
Another change to the ETS, it eliminates physical distancing requirements. That 6 foot distance won't no longer have to do that.
Wow.
Unless there's what's called an outbreak as defined in the ETS. And if that happens, they have to evaluate whether to implement a physical distancing requirement. Another change is there are certain exemptions from exclusion after exposure and testing. So if somebody is exposed to it or test positive for it, there are certain exemptions about whether those employees need to be excluded from the workplace. And there are various other changes regarding exclusion pay, testing for non-vaccinated but symptomatic employees. We don't have time to go into every single one of these, but at the end of the day, the big thing for employers is that fully vaccinated employees do not have to wear a face mask.
Wow.
And that's a big deal for employers.
Huge.
And we'll get into the face mask in a second and vaccination. Brian will talk about that. But another thing you have to worry about is implementing an injury illness prevention program. It's
Oh.
it's an actual program that employers have to put together to deal with and address various issues of COVID-19 in the workplace. And that's something that employers have to do. So my recommendation to employers is make sure you take a look at your illness, injury illness prevention program, and consider how you are going to approach dealing with the issue of vaccinated employees, whether you're going to require it or not. And that's where Brian comes into play, I believe.
Perfect timing for Brian's question then, right?
Exactly.
It's almost like he set that up.
Yes.
I know. That was pretty good. That was really good, actually.
I'm ESP.
I like it. All right, Brian, here we go. May an employer require employees to be vaccinated against COVID-19? And if so, what are the rules regarding a mandatory vaccination policy? That is a big thing right now.
It is a big issue, Kathy. Thanks. And as Ron was just talking about, these new rules, there are differences between how you treat vaccinated versus unvaccinated employees. So this is a big issue for employers. What do they do with employees who may or may not want to be vaccinated, right? And can an employer require vaccination? So we have some guidance on that now. The EEOC, which is the federal agency, has come out and said that employers can require vaccinations with some exceptions that I'll go into. And we actually have the first court case that came out addressing this issue. It was a hospital in Texas, if I recall correctly, where a bunch of hospital employees, nurses mainly, had challenged the hospital's mandatory vaccination policy. And the Texas court dismissed the case and said that employers can indeed impose vaccination requirements. So again, let's break that down a little bit. So generally, an employer can require an employee to be vaccinated, but there's a caveat, and it's similar to what they have had to do with other policies. They have to provide for exceptions, or at least do what's called a reasonable accommodation analysis for a bona fide religious objection, or for a disability that that somehow precludes the employee from obtaining the vaccination, right? So let's talk about those. An employer says, we have a mandatory vaccination policy. In order for you to come back to the office, you must be vaccinated. Employee then says, well, wait a minute, my doctor has told me that it would be dangerous for me to be vaccinated, or I have some underlying medical condition. Right? So the employer now must engage in what's called the interactive process. They have to meet with the employee or talk with the employee. And they need to talk about what are the actual limitations, and is there a way to do a reasonable accommodation? Is there a way to allow the employee to work perhaps remotely, perhaps come in but wear a mask, perhaps come in and be the physical distancing that Ron talked about? It's no longer required, but maybe that's a way that you can accommodate. Again, it's the same standard as we would typically use for a religious or disability accommodation, whether it creates an undue burden on the employer. So the employer cannot just say, oh, no, this is my policy, and if you don't like it, you're fired. You can't do that. You have to go through the analysis, and you have to be able to show, if you're not going to allow it, you have to show that it would create an undue burden. And that, depending on the business, it's an individualized determination, but it's something that the employer wants to really speak to counsel about and talk through if they want to try and enforce that type of policy.
And following up on what Brian said, there are a number of lawsuits around the country now challenging employers' mandatory vaccine policies. And in the one case that Brian was talking about, one of their main arguments, and the arguments of other plaintiffs, is that because this was under an emergency authorization, that they still don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine, and therefore people should not be forced to take something that they don't want to put in their body, because this is not a normal vaccine that took 5-10 years to develop. This was developed over a number, less than a year, and it was only under emergency authorization. But the the judge in that case in Texas threw up an argument saying, you know, that there were tests done, there was a study done, it was authorized by the FDA, and the fact that it was under emergency authorization is not enough to basically prohibit employers from instituting a mandatory vaccination policy. So we'll see what happens. You know, there's going to be a lot of
it's a great point, Ron, because I think, Kathy, when I'm talking with my clients, there's always this issue of can they do something legally?
Right.
But then there's also the question of should they, or what is the impact that's going to have on the employee population?
You bet.
I spoke with a client recently who said they had an employee that was vehemently against vaccination and was speaking about it.
Right.
But then that created some concerns with the other employees in the office who said, well, wait a minute, if this person's saying they're not going to be vaccinated, am I worried about working with them?
Right.
So I talked with the employer, and again, while the employer had the right to impose or mandate vaccination, the employer actually said, look, I'm not a doctor and I don't know, and I don't feel comfortable requiring my employees to do this.
Right.
So then it becomes not so much a legal issue, but it's more of a, look, this is a choice you can make, but then we need to figure out how to make your entire workforce comfortable and make sure that it's not creating a major disruption.
Right.
Yeah, I make the same recommendation to my clients. Issue a voluntary policy, but encourage people to get vaccinated, incentivize them to get vaccinated. The EEOC recently issued guidelines saying you can incentivize people to get vaccinated. You can offer them a bonus, a gift card, other types of gifts to try to, time off, exactly, a paid vacation, to incentivize people to get vaccinated. And I agree with Brian that is typically the first thing you should do is to try to encourage it, incentivize people. And if you don't, then if it doesn't work out, then think about doing a mandatory vaccination policy.
Yes, that sounds great. Great advice from both legal minds here, which is awesome. Of course, I'm thinking about the people who already got their vaccinations and they're going, well, what about me? I was the good person who did my vaccine already. I get nothing. So I kind of like the lottery approach to that, you know, with my employers. And that is, you know, they say we want to do this. I say, okay, well, let's do the lottery approach. So we don't have any, you know, the early to adopt the vaccine people kind of being left out. And so some of them are doing that, which is great. This is a great lead into the next question I wanted to ask you guys, which is for Ron, and that is, although COVID-19 restrictions have been removed in California, many people may continue to work from home, like my firm as well. Is there anything that should be done before authorizing employees to continue to work from home? That's a big question. A lot of our clients, 75% of them are remote, some sort of hybrid working from home. So, and some are 100%. It just depends on the client.
Yeah, more and more individuals want to work from home, and many people are quitting jobs that don't allow them to work from home and finding jobs that do. So you're right, this is the new normal, I think. One of the key things that employers should do is create what's called a remote work agreement or a telework agreement. Right. And this written agreement needs to address a variety of issues. It needs to address technology that's being provided, hours of work, overtime, rest breaks, meal breaks, time tracking, safety, professionalism, security. Treat the at-work context the same that you would at the office. So when someone's working from home, basically treat them the same way that you would working at the office. And you know, it's critical that employees who work from home understand that they have to track all of their hours work. They have to clock in and out. They have to take their rest breaks. They have to take their meal breaks. They have to track their time. They need to act professional and make sure that, like, for instance, any files are secured, that other people in the household don't have access to files that may be somehow confidential or personal in nature. And so those are kind of the much bigger issues. Brian, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Ron, I was just going to emphasize what you said. Wage and hour lawsuits are always a big issue in California. Plaintiffs' lawyers particularly like them because they're entitled to obtain attorney's fees if they succeed on really almost any portion of the claim. And these laws are often very technical.
All right, last question, but not least certainly, is Do I have to pay employees who are on leave due to COVID-19? And if so, what are the rules and requirements related to such a leave? That would be Brian.
Okay. So Kathy, I know that you have followers all over the country, and so I want to emphasize that to some extent we're talking about California here, right? So there was a federal requirement to pay employees on leave related to COVID. That has expired, so that no longer exists. In California, however, the California legislature created a supplemental paid leave requirement. And they actually, it was very unusual, they made it retroactive. So what they did is after they passed it, essentially anyone who had been on leave prior to the time that they had passed it, the employer had to go back and retroactively reimburse them for that leave period. Again, somewhat unusual, but as you said, we're living in unusual times. And so if you're an employer in the state of California, through September 30th, this supplemental paid leave requirement exists. Employers are required to give up to 80 hours of paid leave for COVID-related, it's not absences, but inability to work, essentially. And it can be both for the employee, or it can be for certain family members. And the standard is if they have to quarantine, they're subject to isolation, or for childcare due to COVID-19, then you have to give, again, it's up to this 80 hours of paid leave. So again, we're a little different here in California, but employers are not off the hook. If somebody is going out and it is potentially related to COVID, the employer needs to check these requirements and be aware of them.
Yeah, it's so confusing because it is the new norm, as they're all saying, right? And you don't really know. And every time I talk to a client, they have their own spin on it. So that's why it was so important to get you guys on this call today, because everybody has their own spin. You know, oh, well, someone told me this, someone told me that. And I'm like, no, don't listen to anybody else. Listen to a professional. They know what to tell you, you know, because Grandma Susie isn't going to know. You know? Well,
it's better now, but I remember in the height of all of this, even for the professionals, it was very confusing. You know, the rules were changing literally by the hour. We would advise a client one thing, and an hour later, the Department of Labor would come out with a new FAQ, and they would change the answer completely. So it's been a wild ride. We're hoping we're coming to the end of it, but we're not there yet.
We are getting very close.
So, getting there.
With ending this actual On Deck with Dawson and Dawson, I'd like to give you each some parting words of advice to tell our listeners. Obviously, we're going to post how to reach and contact both of you. Thank you so much for being on this call today. But other than reaching out to you to ask additional questions, what do you think is the soundest advice you can give somebody trying to navigate, other than to call?
I think the biggest issue for an employer right now in these times is probably flexibility. Trying to be flexible, trying to figure out how to make things work in this new environment that we have, right? Not just a knee-jerk reaction, hey, COVID's over and I want every employee back to work. Well, maybe, but if things have been working remotely, as Ron said, you may end up disrupting your whole workforce, because there are now employees who are saying, I enjoyed working remotely and I don't want to come back, or at least I don't want to come back every day. So is there a way to accommodate that and to work maybe part remotely or sometimes remotely? An employee is concerned about COVID, is concerned about a family member that they might expose. It may be that we need to require them to come back, but it also may be that there's a way to work with them. And so again, in these uncertain times, I highly recommend that employers, number one, educate themselves, but then also try and think about, are there ways that they can really try to work in this environment?
That's great advice. Flexibility definitely is a key right now. How about you, Ron?
Well, Brian, you stole what I was going to say. I was going to say exactly what I was saying.
Of course.
Now I have nothing to say.
You always have something to say, Ron. We know better.
Well, okay, I'll take that as a compliment.
It is.
I mean, certainly what Brian said is very important. From my firm's experience, because we've had to decide kind of what we're going to do, we set up a committee of several people to sit down and go over all of these issues and figure out what's the best course of action to take. And so that's what I would highly recommend to companies to get perspectives from several different people, create a committee and decide how are you going to address all of the issues regarding telework, if someone is not vaccinated in the workplace, all the issues that you need to think about, because the more perspective you have and the more opinions you have, I think you'll come to a better conclusion of what you should do. I mean, there are a lot of legal things that you need to do, but as you know, Brian, you pointed out, there are practical business issues to consider as well. So that would be my advice, just based on what my firm has done with all of our employees.
Yeah, that's great advice too, because I think when you collaborate with others and they have a vested interest in it, you're going to get something as an end result that is going to be good for all. And that's creative and clever at the same time. I wanted to ask you guys one other question before you leave. I said the last one was the other question, but I know that this is happening because I'm in search and staffing, and you guys are on the forefront of this happening with your clients. And that is the Great Resignation. Have you seen that with your clients? And if so, how is it affecting them? So the Great Resignation, for our audience that may not know it, it is where everybody now after COVID, the last year and a half, they haven't been as happy with their jobs. And some of their employers didn't handle COVID well. And they're hanging on with their, teeth basically to this job. And so now that things are loosening up, we're seeing employers hiring 3 on one opening, and we're seeing lots of people shuffling, the great shuffling also, because they're relocating different places. If you look at the Great Reshuffling, and you Google that, you'll see the article on it, and the Great Resignation is in there as well. And that is, everybody's starting to leave now, and you can see it. We have 160 plus job openings. We cannot answer our phone fast enough. We cannot find good people. It is very difficult right now. So with the Great Resignation, do your clients, what could you give us some advice from the client's perspective out there that are having this very unusual situation? Like they're expecting 70% people to turn over.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard articles about that.
Lots.
Absolutely. It's a big challenge, Kathy, right? And I think to some extent, employers often don't necessarily recognize the internal cost of losing an employee generally. And I know folks like yourself and staff and recruiters say, the amount of money you've spent hiring and then training and bringing somebody up, when you lose that person, it's a huge cost to replace them. And so, again, that goes back to what I was saying before about some sort of flexibility, or really trying to work with the employee to try and keep those valued employees that you have. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there is this reality. A lot of my work, I do quite a bit of drafting employment agreements, executive compensation, that sort of thing. And I am noticing that the demands of employees, the salaries, the expected salaries, benefits, bonuses, those are all going up. And it's something that employers it's a challenge. It's a real challenge that employers are facing.
Yeah. So the real advice you're giving is to be flexible, but understand what you need as an employer for the future, and don't ever let the emotion of that not wanting to lose somebody get in the way. However, to understand that, some of them are worth keeping and some are not. I mean, that's the bottom line, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
How about you, Ron?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, I think employers need to understand that there's a new normal now, and things like telework and more of a work-life balance are going to be very important for people, especially people working from home. They've gotten used to having this work-life balance where they can work for an hour, then 5 minutes, go downstairs and pet the dog and come back up, right? And so employers, just like Brian said, they have to be flexible. They have to be willing to change. And employers that are not willing to change are going to lose out. Absolutely. And at my firm, we were looking for a couple of labor and employment attorneys, associates, and it has been so difficult to do so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's gonna be big right now. Labor and employment. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a lot of business for you guys. Oh my gosh. Well, Ron and Brian, thank you so much. Like, this has been so informative. I've been taking notes myself just because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I just want everybody to know you can reach Ron and you can reach Brian at their related places of contact. You'll see that when we put the videos out. If you have any questions, I highly recommend both these guys, reach out to them and let them know. You can obviously email, text, or even LinkedIn them, and you'll see more about them as well. So we are going to follow your advice, and we're going to keep those employees set where they are. We're going to make sure they're motivated in the right way, and we're going to make sure we don't require them to have masks or not have masks or any of that stuff you said in the office, because we don't want to do anything wrong. We want to embrace our employees and make it all good for everybody. So thank you guys again.
Thanks, Kathy.
yeah,
Okay,
thank you,
bye,
Kathy.
guys.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.